Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Doomer Optimism podcast, where we have rotating guests, rotating hosts. Today, Ashley, Colby, who's been a regular host. James, you're kind of like a guest and kind of a host, I think. We can think of this as a conversation, but you can kind of define your role however you want. But today, I think we're having kind of a little bit different of a conversation than usual for Doomer Optimism. So I think we're kind of known for being like minimum viable tech. Some might say, Luddites, gasp. But, I'm also probably more than Ashley here, and you can defend yourself, Ashley. I'm kind of a little bit more interested in the possibility of decentralized tech and small scale tech to allow us to be localized, but perhaps, perhaps have slightly better qualities of life than medieval peasants, for example. But we don't want to be, part of fragile supply chains. So that was kind of the idea of having you guys on tonight, is it's just to discuss this kind of, new vision of tech, and kind of how you see technology relating to your decentralized technology, small scale, like distributed manufacturing and things like that, related to new forms of social organization as well, and how you see the future and the future we're heading into. So, but before we get into all that, maybe we'll just start by having James and Eli, both of you kind of just introduce yourselves a little bit and how you relate to kind of these issues. Take as long as you want, maybe a few minutes or whatever. I don't know. James, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm James Risberg. I relate to these. I kind of entered, I guess, the realm of decentralized tech that you're talking about from cryptocurrency world. So I was a software developer and working full time in that for a while, and then in 2017. Crypto blew up. It wasn't the first time, but it was kind of this like mini mainstreaming of cryptocurrency things. Bitcoin price shot up. There was all this hype and all this kind of energy. That's when my attention kind of got caught by it. So I started. I left what I was working on, and I started just kind of reading a lot, researching, doing some like crypto journalism, writing some articles, and got into kind of technical writing, technical editing for research papers. So I've kind of come in from that side, and then I intersect with sort of maybe stuff that y'all talk about more usually, because I found myself doing this in Northern California, in the Bay Area, and was running in circles of folks. Also working on kind of like land projects, permaculture farms, land projects, eco villages, call them what you want, just kind of these sort of like different co-living, co-working situations. So I found myself in those worlds, in the sort of, like crunchy granola builder hippie worlds of like eco village NorCal. And then also this kind of software guy in crypto, learning about distributed systems and learning about this decentralized finance, this kind of world, and have just was drawn immediately to kind of how to bridge these worlds, which have at this point been like, at least are moving towards being quite successfully bridged without much help from me, but have been in those two worlds and interested in how they intersect in both the physical decentralization and then this like kind of software enabled and economic decentralization that really seem to mesh well, have a lot of at least metaphorical commonalities and juice, and more implementation wise and like technical commonalities. So that's sort of my interest, and my connection with Eli is a good friend of mine that we've known each other for a few years, and he's now kind of ramping up a project that he'll tell you all about, that I'm joining on to help with in terms of sort of storytelling, narrative, strategy, and just sort of general kind of mini hat startup vibes. But that's sort of where I'm at.
Eli?
Yeah, I'll unmute there. topic was decentralized tech. Yeah, for me, it kind of starts at the beginning. And the beginning for me was on top of a mountain in the middle of a snowstorm, in the middle of the winter, in the middle of the night, with a shed in a shed with no running water and electricity, which is where I was born by back to the lander hippies from that time period in the late 80s. And so I grew up in this like bucolic, idyllic, very low tech environment. And of course, my vector of rebellion was to become an accomplished technologist in the San Francisco Bay Area. Go figure. And it's kind of coming full circle for me because my technology path was in renewable energy for a long time. When I was 16, I had a motorcycle and I was tired of paying for fuel, so I wanted to figure out how to make my own fuel. And I started asking the internet, how do you make fuel? And I just never stopped. And I learned about hydrogen and biogas and got into gasification, just all these things. I worked on that, and I was working for a company called Power Labs for a long time, which does decentralized power generation from raw biomass, so wood chips to electricity, these little pallet-sized units for basically villages in developing countries. But there was with the whole time there was this like gnawing at me, and it really bubbled up in the beginning of the pandemic. And the gnawing was, no matter how cleanly or greenly we power things, the way we make stuff is inherently extractive. So you really have to solve both, right? You can't just solve the power problem and expect the world to be okay. We have to solve the making of things, food and durable goods and all that. And what I really liked about that as a fulcrum is that there's way more financial leverage to be had from stuff than power. I mean, you need both, right? You should have your own sovereign power, but then the ability to make things puts whoever owns that production equipment in the position of great economic resilience. And so my heart being out to those who are stewarding land and trying to be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem, and having seen kind of what that looks like sometimes, I saw there's a clear fit for the right tools for those people. So, we're a tool-bearing species, always have been. And so what is the appropriate tool set? And this really kicked off in the beginning of the pandemic when there was a clear supply chain fragility around alcohol, because the need for sanitizer, you couldn't get alcohol, you couldn't get sanitizer. With my renewable energy background, from being 16, I knew how to build a distillery. So I started making alcohol. Wow, actually, I can make this way cheaper than I can buy it, and I can pay my rent in the San Francisco Bay Area by having this refrigerator-sized distillery that's just sufficiently. And I was able, that freed me up to do things like reduce cost of sugar by finding local free candy waste that someone was making, and had a year's supply of that direct resource, cut my costs in half, further making it more cost effective. And so with that as this sort of like major challenge to economy of scale, realizing economy of scale is it's not a capital T truth. It's fallible. It's not always true. And where it's not true, what that looks like is decentralizing manufacturing. We're already seeing this as a vector in technology, because as automation improves and labor costs go down, there's no reason to pay for a machine to be operating autonomously far, far away. You start cost optimizing by being closer, and you start bringing the machines as close as possible. Am I getting too much in the details? I'll just keep going.
No, you're not.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so you that you just need to start bringing the natural resources, the market, and the equipment all as close as possible together, and that's the next logical step in cost optimizing, right? And this is really good because now you have a complex system of production equipment near natural resources, and if you scale it correctly and you map it out right, you can actually acknowledge the natural systems that are endemic to that region. Ideally, you've got some indigenous wisdom you can borrow and like presence to the systems there and participate with these tools. So you can harness the natural systems, accelerate them in some cases, and overall, yes, participate, not dominate. And all the while making products and that you need, and having, yeah, in many cases, the ability to make a good living as a land steward. I mean, adding many zeros to the end of your revenue per acre by having, several revenue streams. And if you organize it correctly, you can push a bunch of biological material into the soil and do a lot of regenerative work. And so that was a big awakening for me, and it felt imperative to empower this. And the gaps are, you can't buy the right tools. If the people who build industrial tools, they're engineering for a different kind of client, those who think in this scaled up way. Our built environment isn't even really meant for it at this point. But so you have to have the right tools, and you have to have the right business models, and those are missing right now to really enable someone to be a sovereign, small local producer within these closed loop systems. It's kind of a leap. It's not impossible by any means. You just can't go out and buy the tools you need at this point. Which led me to what I'm doing now. Is I've launched a venture studio called New Power Industry, whose purpose is to design closed loop microindustry and develop those tools. And so I've got a pipeline of small scale, somewhat sophisticated process tools that can be used in service of people who are stewarding land, or custodians of land that need to earn a living. And so where this is more cost effective and you can implement, you actually have this erosion of the existing extractive systems, because now the way you're making the products you need is in this new model that at least invites you to closed loop systems and really encourages it. Because when you connect a producer of product with the resources they're drawing from, I believe you've successfully developed made a land steward, because you can't just take from far away and move on, right? Like you can't just abstractly extract as you ruin soil. You're there. That is what that is your living, and you're a part of it, and there's this reciprocation. So that relationship, I think, can be realized with systems thinking, the right tools, and a reimagination of how we organize production equipment. So I'll just land it there for now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so I'm gonna jump in as like I think my role in general is to be like I'm armed with my PhD, so I can ask dumb questions. So people won't just think I'm just straight dumb, but as like a foil, an outsider or whatever. To clarify. Okay, so like who are the producers? What are they producing? Who are we talking about? Like give me some details, like that normal people can understand. What kinds of things, and then how do you know it's like they're land stewards? How do you like vet that? Because for me, like a big thing that I'm always worried about is like data, how people become legible, and measured.
Yeah, no, great question. I think it'll end up being a rollout. The early adopters will be folks who have intentional communities and eco villages, things like that. Eventually, we'd love to empower farmers, but that's a lot, kind of a ways to go there. But I think we can build use case studies in that world of eco villages and whatnot. So, yeah, someone who owns land, is interested in making a living off of it, and is seriously dedicated to doing that, would be a place to start. And so what they're making. So I did say generally like stuff, right? And I focused on, at this point, value add food products as a kind of segment to go after. I mean, durable goods are hard, and people are working on that. That's the whole a lot of the circular economy stuff you see is about how to make durable goods so they're regenerative. Great. Challenging food we actually need. So giving people the ability to make value-add food products on site, very good. So imagine like you're a farmer, you're growing stuff, and you have this refrigerator-sized ravioli maker. You know, you have like a few hoppers of materials, you load in the flour you made some cheese, some herbs, and then you press go, and then out comes packaged ravioli, no problem. And so you can, that would be an example of what that would look like. Of course, it can get really complex with being a fuel producer as well. Like often when you're running these closed loop systems, there are opportunities to make lots of energy. That can be liquid fuels, that can be electricity. You're making biochar ideally, and then really being sure to make that a part of your system. So I'm better with pictures. I have some great pictures that describe this better. But lots of design elements that all have their own value. And then I think I lost track of your questions. What am I missing?
And then how do you like make people legible? How do you know who's doing what?
Right. Well, there are two projects that I'll mention. One of which I'm involved in. I think it's the 2025-2024 X Prize is for the biodiversity in the rainforest. And so I'm advising for this team who's trying to figure out how to measure biodiversity within an ecosystem. They're trying to do it with robots, which, you know, that's the boundaries of the X Prize. It has to be done autonomously. Whether or not it's the best, I don't know. But there's a bunch of thinking going into, how do we measure biodiversity in an ecosystem? I think that's a really good measure. If you can successfully do that, like, great. And then there's a woman I'm friends with who's figuring out how to get satellites can like shoot lasers into the ground and measure carbon pretty deeply, actually. I think up to 8 inches or something like that. I don't remember the details, but she's working on how to measure carbon sequestration in soil on farms efficiently using the satellite. It's not totally worked out yet, but things like that are decent metrics for how successful someone is in regenerating land.
Yeah, to your question, Ashley, there's not like a requirement to be a legible land steward per se, to be like somebody who might be interested in buying one of these machines. That seems like the question was like, how do we know that the people buying these machines are sort of land stewards or folks that that are custodying land or working land? It's not. That's not really something that's being proved. Like they're kind of basic kind of resource, like industrial machines. Like he said, his first machine is it's an ethanol distillery. Takes in sugary fuels and yeast and generates ethanol, which can then be used in by existing like alcohol manufacturers. Maybe they're using it in existing products. It could be used as an industrial solvents and cleaners, could be used as a fuel in small engine. Like, so it's more like these kind of fully automated kind of homestead scale machines. So the mention of the land stewardship and the eco village and this kind of thing, they're not necessarily constrained to that context, but they're sort of in the constellation of big giant factory machine that requires several employees full-time to run, to your kind of DIY in your kitchen, like science kit. These are like premium industrial kind of automated machines, but at small scale. So they're kind of cost effective for let's say the farm operator or the eco village to purchase and then use to produce what is usually being made at huge scale, at the smaller local scale, to be used locally in processes.
Let me ask you.
Okay, I'm just going to repeat back. Wait, I just want to repeat back to make sure I understand, and then Jason, you ask a question. So like, okay, so you guys you're not necessarily like the arbiter of who's being a good land steward or anything like that. You're just empowering people to produce things at a smaller scale with appropriate machines to work at those scales, with the assumption that working at smaller scales will have lower carbon footprints which I agree with.
Right. We're like building tools and lowering the friction to working at smaller scales. So the folks that are interested in doing that already can do it.
Okay, cool. Sorry, Jason, you go.
Yeah, no, I'm wondering, so in terms of like the business model, is this meant, so right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like the business model is you sell these machines, and I saw your video about the distillery, and your vision is a bunch of kind of small scale manufacturers. They sell to kind of like a cooperative, which then kind of achieves some kind of scale and marketing. But are you seeing this as a kind of proprietary model where you're selling proprietary machine to these communities, or are you seeing it eventually moving to kind of like, so for example, the open source ecology, like their model is, you know, we upload kind of the designs, we hold workshops that people can learn how to, you know, basically build the machines themselves. I'm wondering how you think about that business model.
That's a great question, and love to unpack that with you. Yeah, I mean, as a lifelong maker, the maker movement is very dear to my heart, and you know, I was screwing together pieces of wood before I was in elementary school, building whatever. My dad was I was very lucky. My father was a carpenter, so I was like, picked up my first welder when I was 9, and built a forge, and then became like, you know, the world's smallest blacksmith. It's probably not true. And so after, like, going down that path, like that, it's so resonant with me to say, yeah, give me plans. I have access to tools. I can make anything. It's kind of a position of privilege, right? It's hard to actually be at the intersection of the competencies and access and the time to make your own machine. Because, you know, in the end, what you need to be doing is making the product, right? You need to be making the alcohol to make a living, and tinkering is fun, but it's like the path to having that is sometimes a little too fictitious. And I'm just saying this for the distillery, for example. Like, the answer is yes, you know, it'll be open. I don't know how many people will actually really be able to engage it. I'd rather get you financed with a machine that works and make sure you have the support you need to keep it running, than require people to, you know, roll up their sleeves and build the thing. And I think that open source ecology did a really good job of identifying what can you do that way. And it's fantastic. They've got a whole slice of stuff that, yeah, if you've got the wherewithal, you can do that, and people should. And then, yeah, there's a whole world of machines and tools that I don't know to what extent they fall in that category. But more specifically for the distillery, where I see that kind of vision happening is, a lot of people already have distilleries. A lot of people already have small distilleries. And the only thing that makes mine special is the automation box, which is, it's a high technical lift, but it removes most of the labor. So that's what brings the cost down, so you can actually enter into the market. And so an echo throughout this project has been, you know, maybe it won't even need to be the distillery I sell. It might just be the automation box, so that anyone who built a distillery, wants to build a distillery, can have access to that layer of sophistication, to have all the benefits of that.
You talked about, you want to go, Ashley?
Wait, I got a question, just like that might help, I don't know, lay the groundwork. I'm wondering if either of you are interested in defining or explaining what open source ecology is, what's a maker space, and then maybe Eli, if you want to talk about what an automation box means. I don't know if, like, I'm not sure who's listening or who will be listening to this, if they have any familiarity with these things. So it would be cool if we just sort of, like, you know, laid it out there, what these terms are, these groups.
Sort of contrasting like maker vibes, maker movement with sort of prepackaged products. That seems great.
Yeah, and like literally specifically open source ecology is like a thing. It's like a group of people doing something. It would be good if you guys defined what that was. And then a maker space is like a term I've heard used. It'd be cool if you defined it in your own words, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess I can. Open source ecology, actually, Jason, you might know them better than I do. Is basic. Yeah, do you want to go for it, Jason? Who's open source ecology?
Well, a guy started it, Marcin Jurowski, is that his name? Yeah, I mean his basic idea, and I don't know him personally. I've listened to a podcast. I've seen some of his materials and stuff. It's basically this idea that you can have kind of a global commons of design for physical machines. Basically, he has what he calls kind of the civilization tool set that they're working on, toolkit, like 100 machines that you can basically bootstrap a civilization with, like bread makers and tractors, and and so his idea is he basically develops the prototypes, uploads them, other people can tinker with them, upload their adaptations. Then part of the model is a lot of workshops. People can go to workshops to kind of learn how to use tools to build circuit makers and things of that nature, to welding, and basically the idea is empowering local communities to use kind of as much as possible locally sourced materials to build their own machines, basically. Do you want to add anything to that description, James or Eli?
No, it sounds complete to me.
Okay, and we're contrasting that with the maker movement. What is the maker movement?
What is the maker movement? Yeah, I mean, the maker movement is, I guess it was this movement that was started to encourage people to really take production into their own hands. The 3D printer is kind of the poster child. It's this notion that if you give people the meta means of production, that is like tools that make things, then they could make stuff that makes things, or make whatever they need. And so having those like fundamental universal tools, cheap and accessible, I think with open plans, kind of like what they're doing over at the thing you described. And so the maker movement is a good reference point for me, because I've been in the play space of like, okay, where exactly do you put the lines of ownership or responsibility between a large company who's making stuff and like the small the small independent sovereign person. And yeah, I think the nuance there really matters. I don't know how you measure success of the maker movement or not, but I think it's asking for an evolution where you can, whatever it takes to get people making things is kind of my it's kind of the way I see it, right? That's the goal, is people making their own stuff. And so I have already kind of described where I'm at with it, is what people can make good, fully empower that. Yeah. And then make sure that what's not as accessible is made accessible through productization of those production equipment, so that people who need to be making stuff for their own economic sovereignty can. It's kind of I think an important part of it is the access question. Yeah.
It seems like what you're kind of envisioning is kind of a little bit of a plurality of approaches, and I'll relate this to just some Twitter interactions we had with Joe Norman a little while ago as well, in a different sense, where you see a role for kind of what you're doing, of like, say somebody doesn't have the skill set and they don't really have the time or the luxury to learn it, or the skills or the inclination to learn how to build a distillery, for example, that they can buy the machines and focus on the production of the actual alcohol and value-added products and things of that nature. But you're saying there's kind of a space for both. And what you and Joe were talking about just a little bit ago was this notion of, in the context of farmers, the family farm and the commons. And you were kind of saying that you don't really see kind of the future being centered around kind of family farmers, but more of like kind of commons with multiple families. there seems to be an intersection here that's interesting to me, where, what is, I guess the broader question is, what is the scale of production, right? And so if people, you're saying individuals kind of buy their own machines, or communities or an eco-village buys a distillery and they sell it, as a product from that eco-village or an individual. What do you see kind of the dynamics of kind of nested scales of commons, you can say? And what I mean by nested scales of commons, we've had this conversation with other folks. You can consider families as being a commons, right? As kind of like almost like a base layer of commons. And so, yeah, do you want to, I don't know, either you or James or you and Ashley want to, I don't know, unpack kind of your thinking around this?
I'm just gonna I would just like to tack on to that question. Like, I think there is the sort of commons utopianism that exists, which is just like, yeah, the commons, let's do it. And it's like, okay, how? I mean, there are issues with managing common spaces. A lot of commons that have existed historically, developed through an iterative process of really strong cultural ties and norms, social norms, et cetera, et cetera. So I think in general, I just take a very skeptical view towards like, let's just do the commons. It's more just, how, and I'm open to it. I'm agnostic. I don't have I have a dog in the fight, but I think there's getting into the details is interesting to me.
Definitely. So the first thing you said, which I just want to touch on, utopian visions. I feel like every utopian vision becomes a totalitarian. Like it becomes totalitarian in implementation.
Hard agree on that one.
So yeah, there's definitely reasons to be skeptical of a utopian vision of commons. Like, wow, it sounds like no one has anything, perhaps. But yeah, the commons, I've been reading up on it a little bit more recently. Eleanor Ostrom is this economist that I just strongly recommend anyone look up, because her ideas are super important and just not actually well represented, unfortunately. She won the Nobel Prize eventually, but that was after like decades of her doing tons of research. And I think being a woman it was a hard time to be a woman economist, I think, with a big idea, unfortunately. So, and also ideas that upset lots of powerful people, which was about the commons, right? She's like, no, like we actually can trust each other. She could find examples. Like there are these little societies, to your point, they had long cultural history. She's like, well, what did they have going for them? Like, why did it work there, and why doesn't it work over here? And like, where should you use the commons was kind of a greater question she had. Because there's three basic ways, or there's one way to look at it is that there's three ways to do stuff. You can have governments, you can have private entities, and then people self-organizing. It's just like not often talked about way to accomplish things. Often you have people arguing over one or the other of either regulations or markets, fighting as if either one was the only solution, but really it's a toolkit. And self-organizing over the commons is a tool. It's a hammer, but not everything's a nail, right? So first you have to understand where it works, where it doesn't, and use it accordingly. But the big takeaway for me from Eleanor Ostrom's work was she identified 7 design parameters for creating collaborative groups. So like, or creating an environment where self-organizing is feasible by identifying what those conditions were in other cultures. And when you look at them, there's nothing esoteric. It's like common vision. You need to have rewards, and you need to have accountability, and like, all these things that you look at it, you're like, yeah, this assembled makes a whole bowl. It makes a full bowl that doesn't leak goodwill. It holds it holds the goodness. And if you're missing anything, you've got a problem. And often you can look at that list and think to yourself, yeah, I've had a job where we just didn't do one of those things, or clearly in this scenario, like one of these is just missing. And so there is a model she put a ton of work in to say, if you want people to self-organize over the commons, you have to have them operating within these characteristics that are conducive to it. And if you don't, it's going to go really poorly. It's kind of her thing. So it was a good extension of the story of the tragedy of the commons, where it kind of shows the good part of how the sharing the commons can work out. And for me, it was powerful because it's one of these handholds for building towards a future that does empower people to be stewards of the land and be members of their own little societies, and without needing any sort of like top-down control in all aspects of their life. So it's like, okay, how can we do that? And she has an answer. She has a good comprehensive answer, and it's really inspiring to read. And she talks a lot about the commons and how that can work in other ways. One of them that I'll just mention is like people being able to leave a system, like the ability to leave a commons to another, to vote with your feet. Actually gives you a tremendous amount of power. And so when you have too large, when your consolidated systems get too large, you can't leave them. You're stuck there, and you don't have the power that you normally have. So distributed systems of commons kind of inherently grant more power to the people who are there participating and on that level. So that's my little spiel about the commons. I'm happy to continue unpacking it. I think it's an important topic.
So you've talked about this notion of eco-industrial village networks. And I'm curious, if we're thinking about, the commons as being, a tool set that perhaps is part of a larger meshwork of, different types of organizational incentives and designs, like where does the commons fit into, say, your ethanol distillery? Is it in terms of the marketing, like a bunch of individual producers who are producing privately are then pooling their product as a commons to sell to a larger market, right? So that there's already like, this idea of different types of structures. You're selling to a market, you're aggregating as a commons, you're producing privately. Do I have that right? And I guess more broadly, how do you see this notion of the commons fitting into eco-industrial village networks? Like where does it what is the proper scope of the commons in this model?
Yeah, so you're pretty much spot on for the ethanol revolution. In the ideal embodiment, person owns the machine. They have the right to create and market their own product and bring that to their local market, but they also have access to the common cooperative and have that. They have the benefit of the commons and also the agency to not participate if the cooperative isn't treating them right, they can go do it themselves. So I'm a part of the mission. The goal is to create a cooperative that is generous to the producers, and finding resiliency in that if some other company wanted to dominate in the typical ways by trying to like optimize by taking from the producer, they're not going to give up the sovereignty they have. And so having the cooperative be really dependent on the producer's success and having a more balanced relationship, I think makes the cooperative more resilient. It's a little off topic, but wanted to add that. And so the commons and the eco-industrial village network, the eco-industrial village network is a concept that came about when I asked myself, what does it look like to create an environment for human thriving where people can be good for the world and each other, and not just trying to be less bad, but actually do the productive work of regeneration and be rewarded for it. And it's a bunch of land projects. Within the land project, there'll be an ethanol revolution, probably like a distillery through the cooperative in every single one. Similar models for other pieces of production equipment and products and markets, all of which is shared commons. I mean, that's the part I've been thinking deeply about. But the agricultural land might be a really interesting commons to share if done properly. I think that having a commons like that allows more inroads for building equity and contributing and participating to that nascent society. And done well, I think it's a great opportunity to be able to invite people in warmly to have stake in it. But there's so many layers to that. There's so many layers to we're building a network of societies. There's I don't know. I'm kind of drawing a blank on the rest of the commonses, but that's what comes to mind.
Well, I mean, I don't want to dominate the question. So Ashley or James, if you want to jump in, feel free. I do have something I could follow up on.
Oh, go for it. Go for it.
Okay. Where was I? Never mind. I forgot. So it's going to come back. So one of you do it.
James, we haven't heard from you for a bit. I'm wondering your thoughts on these topics.
Well, I guess the questions around commons utopianism, kind of these kind of questions, where my head is on that, and is that what the folks coming from the like decentralized software, cryptocurrency, sort of Web3, like this is like whole world of folks that get a lot of knocks on them, rightfully, for being making a lot of utopian noise about what they think that they're building, and the kind of, you know, hyper capitalist sort of markets that will align all incentives globally through crypto economic systems. And like there's a lot of hopium, there's a lot of like big talk, there's a lot of this kind of carrying forward of the sort of vision of like, oh well, if we just pay everyone and they like each other, then they'll get along. And it's like, yeah, but the second part, they like each other, is like a huge right? these systems don't, like the economic systems don't solve the social problems. So when it comes to like you're saying, like tragedy of the commons, like you're running commons, you have a group of people, how do you get them to all, you're starting to see, at least where I start to see the projects coming out of, you know, and this is kind of diverging from the decentralized manufacturing and physical stuff that Eli's building, but bringing in the software side of things, you have some contingent of folks in the sort of broader kind of Venn diagram of kind of crypto punk, libertarian, kind of patchwork folks that think that you know, they're like super property rights, super kind of internal local currencies for markets between people, and then you have another a more kind of commons focused, maybe left, kind of and utopianist thinking on both sides of the sort of markets will solve all of our problems, and you know, communication tools for
or cooperation, coordination,
right? Like Slack, like a better Slack is what we're missing to operate the commons, right? Like if we had an encrypted peer-to-peer messaging app that had all the right features and lets you like send tokens of appreciation to your friends, like then we would get to where we're trying to go. And it seems like, you know, there's a lot of great thinking and great experiments.
Utopianism.
Right, it is utopianism. But the projects I do see trying that can potentially do this is that there is a lot of interesting juice for me in this idea of local economies, right? We're talking like circular economies, local economies. What does that really mean in this new wave of kind of technology, or at least economic technology? I don't know enough about the specifics of like the commons to say whether we can really like escape from the sort of enclosure tactics of capital. the crypto technologies that are coming out are capital technologies, but they do allow for a really interesting phenomenon, which is the truly local currency, which is like I can spin up a currency at minimal cost, distribute it to only to the folks that I want it to be distributed to, and then collectively as a group, whether that's a large group or a small group, we can sort of lay subjective value over that currency and start to transact it between ourselves. This isn't a new thing. There have been local currencies, plenty of local currencies in the past where you had communities that kind of ran their own local currencies. You could, and there's examples, even more commercial examples like loyalty points and credits and like all these kind of things. But when you marry that idea of being able to sort of spin up local currencies that sort of out of the box create an economic, for better or worse, an economic cluster of like economically aligned individuals with this idea of with this idea of this sort of like patchwork. Like he was mentioning like exit, like your ability to exit a commons and move to another place. You have like a polycurrency, polyeconomic system where there is juice for some of these social tokens. There is juice for some of these local currencies that could enable like circular economies within a local place. I'm starting to see some really interesting work in that. I'm starting to see what I've just been referring to as village tech recently, which is it is that sort of, maybe it's utopian, but is sort of that like better Slack. If we had it, it would work. But what it is it's sort of bringing in the social tools that you need to communicate, share resources and information. So that is your chatting, that is your posts, that is your kind of document library, that is your sort of digital information, kind of like a, like the info store, like the classic, I don't know, in some of the sort of like anarchist communities or some of the more punk communities, you have the sort of info store idea of like, this is where you go and get the literature. This is where you go and get the info. This is where you go. People are printing their new things. Like the kind of, a lot of the utopian people, they point at things like the Whole Earth catalog. Right? The Whole Earth catalog was this sort of maker movement before the maker movement in the 60s. It was just this catalog of like how to grow your own stuff and build your own stuff and hack your own stuff. And like, we're going to do it, like back to the land. We're going to go and almost all of that just sort of fell flat in the face of, it was pre-internet, well, the internet kind of came, it was like coincident with the development of the internet. So it wasn't really, it was pre-social tools. So you do see some new social tools and currencies as information systems. So bringing together your communication tools, your Slack, your posts, your document library, your resource sharing, your blueprints, your 3D printing models, your how to build your tractor from the ecology group with the ability to spin up local currencies. And I see really interesting groups that are trying things like time banking, trying things like, if you create a, can you spin up a local currency for a land project that then is also equity in that project, or is also, if you're spinning out companies or projects from a group, can you assign ownership in those projects and people, and can you do these economic alignments of folks to help with some of this? Because in terms of like the true commons, like it's unowned, it's hard for me. I don't have the wherewithal to say like, yes, that's accomplishable, because like at this, I think the classic, like at this stage in like capital development and the sort of financialization of the world, financialization is sort of like munching everything, and the folks that, at least in this decentralized software world that I see that are trying to do, it's like, well, okay, if we're going to financialize everything, if there's like an inexorable march towards the financialization of the world and the attempt to sort of quantify value, can we inject human judgment and subjective value back into capital systems by creating local currencies and by creating sort of, the NFT way right, which is like 99.9% grift, but like 0.01% really interesting, cool stuff. And that 0.01% is a lot because it's huge. So like even a very small amount of like interesting stuff is like enough interesting stuff that you could never keep up with all of it. So when you have these kind of tokens that aren't even exchangeable tokens in a sense that you can go one-to-one and they're all, the term is fungible, right? Like $1 is $1 is $1. These are specific context-rich representations of value that can be digitally handed around. So that might be information, that might be favors, that might be reputation.
Could be measured ecological health. That's what like Regen Network, like that's their goal, right? It's like
right.
if you could quantify ecological health, in a way that's robust, which is questionable, but if you could, and you can back currencies based on that. So I'm just adding that example.
No, yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And Eli mentioned like the satellite scanning for carbon sequestration in the soil, and kind of you have things like Regen Network does like soil testing for carbon sequestration, and then is kind of representing pretty much like sequestered, like what is it, CO2 equivalent, right? Like that's the metric. That's like the like carbon markets coming online, and they measure that impact in equivalent tons of CO2 equivalent. So there are some of these quantizable things, and if there is a quantizable metric that is actually useful, which, like you said, Jason, like questionable, it's like
questionable.
it's easy, right? It's easy to run.
Questionable.
It's easy to get yourself into a situation where it's like the calorie, right? Like from what I understand of like the history of the calorie as a metric, is like
Right.
it's just like not good. Like
from seeing like a state to seeing like an all-seeing distributed blockchain that is equally totalitarian.
Well, I mean,
right.
it's the panopticon. Guys, there's the panopticon. You got to like be afraid of this thing. You don't want to be like, come in, opening the door for the panopticon, first of all. Second of all, I want to make another meta comment, which is I feel like there are just so many technologies that have the potential to do a million different things. And it's unclear to me, like human beings in their messy realness interacting with these like potential utopian visions or potential totalitarian visions. And for me, like, I think it's really cool to think about using these tools. Like I'm a person who's literally making a class online for people to learn about homesteading and to like put all their information in one place and so they can find it. But I also want all of those people to be drawn to that online space so that they meet other human beings and then talk to those human beings and then go learn things in real life with those other human beings. So like, I don't know. I just think I'm just going to make a meta comment that humans are messy. All of these technologies and ideas are extremely new. You have no idea like what's going to happen with them and or what are the unforeseen things. So I just like, I'm like a fan and also like terrified. I guess this is my meta comment.
It's totally fair. Yeah,
very fair. And it is like these are human problems and social problems that are not solved by technology, and they're not solved by, especially not solved by economic technologies, because the fabric of like human life on this planet is not economic. It's relational, it's social, and it's and it's rooted and it's grounded in a physical reality of like, I need to eat this food, I need these walls around me so I don't freeze. Like there's a lot of these like base foundational things, and including the relational, including the social, and through the cultural, that right, these tools, they cannot replace human interaction, and there is a contingent of, and maybe a large contingent of the sort of, hey, smart contracts, that way we don't have to talk to each other, like hey, like reduce the idea of like eliminating trusted third parties, but like defining like third parties as literally everyone but you, like solipsistic, and they're that kind of like code is law, like we're going to replace human interactions with transactions and track them all in the blockchain, and then it's going to be great because then we're keeping track of everything. It's just like, no, I agree. Like it's not how we solve these problems. And like human, like there's not a reputation system devisable that can replace or even attempt to approach the fidelity and richness of human interpersonal trust and sociality as the mechanism by which we, like we mentioned earlier, like Eli mentioned earlier, like self-organize to like take care of places. So yeah, I think your meta comment is well received. It's not a panacea. It's, if anything, like the tools that Eli is developing, like these tools hopefully can some of these tools, some will be panopticon surveillance tech as you said, because like like the blockchain universe is total transparency and mass surveillance, but there's also and it's where the cypherpunks kind of bring in their sort of encrypted, out of view, like, can we build these peer-to-peer mutualistic, as the open source sort of mutualistic side and the hyper financialized kind of hyper capitalist side that overlap in the realm of some of these technologies, but are definitely meaningfully different in how they want them to be implemented, or how they think to be implemented. My hottest take when it comes to these kind of technologies is that technologies are humans are primarily moral creatures, and technologies are amoral extensions of our senses and our abilities, and it's not like the technological landscape that's going to get us to a place where we're actually taking care of the planet. But it might reduce friction to people that are already, from their own hearts, desiring to take care of the planet and their land and their friends, but don't have the tools to do it.
Yeah, I would just make one small comment. I'm sorry, I'll let other people speak, but I just want to say, I think we should just think of them as tools over which we are the masters, and not like something to worship as an idol. I don't know, like to put it in religious terms, but like it's a tool we can use for an end, not like something like, oh, it's so interesting and amazing and maybe even above our own brains, and therefore like let it go. We invented this amazing thing that we should just let fly free without, I don't know, some sort of reins.
At the same time, though, it's like it feels like a macro organism. We've created technology with like the IPO machine. It's like this self-generating like wad of similar stuff that keeps replicating and growing, and it feels like it has its own like mind. And I don't know if we really learned how to euthanize macroorganisms as a species.
Oh my God. Oh, okay, but I just have to make a funny comment. Earlier today, my husband was reading through Twitter, and there was some tweet that mentioned the word shoes, and it like wasn't a tweet about shoes, but then Twitter asked like, is this a tweet about shoes? And it was just yes or no, and he was just like, AI my ass. And it was just so funny because it's just not like, it's not intelligent. I mean, I don't know, maybe this is just obviously one example, maybe there's some AI going on out there that we're not aware of or whatever, but it's just like, I don't know, I just feel like people are kind of worshiping it in a sort of unhealthy way, and not thinking of it
to make us think it's not intelligent.
Right.
Yeah.
Get us off its trail. No, I think you're pointing at something.
It's trying to trick us.
Yeah.
Probably. If it's as intelligent as it's going to be, it'll be tricking the shit out of us.
Well, I think the thing I see is like often what we're trying to solve with AI and these technologies are things we actually have faculties for. I in some AI rooms I kind of laugh because I'm like, so you're trying to bring up all these sensors to natural systems. I think what you're going to discover is what people who used to live on the land already knew quite well, and were like perfectly qualified to understand and interpret. And like, yeah, you just need a person who cares over there, and they're going to do far better. So the reinvention of indigenous wisdom through AI is this like tragic comedy that I'm watching unfold. It's not the whole thing, but it's like a little piece of it. I think it's funny.
Yeah, I also think it's the same thing is true with like the Slack comment. Like people know how to be friends. We don't actually need to like reinvent friendship through Slack. You know what I mean? I just feel like, or people know how to like have relationships with one another, and like Slack could just be like this completely adjacent tool that's like, you know, helping to foment the already existing, you know, maybe the Slack is 1% of the 99% of the relationship that's extremely complex and couldn't be made legible. But 1%, it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm just gonna like offload that 1% into this space so I can search it easily.
Right, like the tools like Slack, like you don't, especially when we're talking like this conversation is kind of rooted in, we're talking about communities, people that are co-located on a piece of land and like working it to do things. So they're not, you know, but then there are, so like they don't need help talking per se. But then there are logistical challenges that software can assist with. Like the, you know, the vast majority of software making money out there is effectively spreadsheets with really nice interfaces. And spreadsheets are very useful for managing any sort of operation, whether that's a farm or a collection of farms or like a kind of a bioregional thing. So yeah, it's not tools to replace like human sociality, but to sort of yeah, kind of assist in supporting the processes that are already kind of there.
I think that there is room for, well, so I'll just mention some things I'm working on. You know, the Eco-Industrial Village Network is this vision that came about as not like a specific utopian vision, but a kind of like a framework for, you could get a set of tools and some people and some intention and say, okay, builds your society now. Your goal is to treat each other well. Your goal is to earn a living and regenerate the soil. And then here's all the things you need, whether it be industrial tools, but I think social tools are really important, especially if you're going to walk a bunch of people, typical, you know, Homo economicus, into a pro-socially collaborative commons endeavor. I think anybody would have to go through some sort of like personal transformation to really acknowledge, like, okay, this isn't an antisocial competitive environment. This is about being a part of nature and being a part of a community and maybe a multi-generational chosen family, or, you know, these things we're becoming less and less familiar with. There is this like transformation required, I think. But then how do you invite someone through that personal growth without forcing them through the extruder of some dogma, right? You want to maintain their sovereignty, their dignity, their agency through that. And from that question, I've been starting to work with some really interesting people who, adding to the toolbox next to the distillery, is that personal transformation, which can be done through, she's spent her life working on it. She has this idea for an app that could help kind of like guide your way to some interesting questions that probably have growthful answers and more than I know how to fully describe. But the other one is really interesting, is this woman who is she studied like societies and history and like how societies emerge and what their pieces are, and like she's been able to identify a countable number of like contradictions or tensions you have to resolve as a group of people. And then basically your society is an expression of how you ranked the answers, right? Like you decided that on the spectrum of like personal freedom versus, you know, state control, you're fixed somewhere and you decided, you know, that was the most important. Then you rank and you rank and you rank. And so what she has a paradigm for, what she has a model for, is building a societal layer on top of, you know, anybody who's trying to do stuff together, kind of this like guided process that is also reverse engineerable, and therefore like you can diagnose it. You can understand its pieces and talk about them intelligently. And I think this is huge, right? Like I don't know, maybe James, you can talk about emergent complexity a little bit, because I think there's this funny tension in all these cases of like top-down design versus emergent complexity. You know, kind of where I'm coming at it from an industrial standpoint is give people industrial tools, put them in a biosphere, have them learn about it, and then they can piece together with like Lego bricks, a micro-industrial system that is good. rather than having a like, oh, we made something that succeeded here, and now we're going to copy that exact industrial system, that exact societal system, and spread it all over the place. So I've been thinking deeply about on what layer do you template? Where's the toolbox, and like where's the sameness, and then where do you allow for emergent human complexity? And that has been one of my primary, at a high level, thinking there across technology and society building, governance, economics.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, James. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of sort of emergent complexity and Eli's just comment, I guess I would jump into a bit, maybe more of an abstract kind of place, and talk just a little bit about, like, it's kind of a question of at what, like Eli was saying, like, draw the line. Where do you draw the line in terms of, it's sort of like the granularity of the specificity of the systems that you're building in a physical way, like the built systems on the Earth. The Earth is a surface area. There's resources distributed in some manner. There's terrain. There's climate. There's all these environmental factors, and there's people that live in those places. Some of those people evolved with those environments. Some of those people, in much of the planet now, did not evolve necessarily with the environments that they live in. They've moved to those environments. But there is, like, in sort of a more abstract, I guess, kind of adaptive complex systems lens, like there's information content, there's like in the environment, and there's a sort of the kind of top-down blueprint versus the emergence and complexity question is really a question of at what level of granularity and kind of context specificity to the place that you're building in are you building it? And if you can push the sort of decision making as local as possible, if you can create a set of basic industrial and kind of like construction and just basic tools for manipulating and structuring the environment, give them to folks at a local level and say, like, respond to your environment directly. There's versus the kind of, Jason mentioned seeing like a state earlier, seeing like a state sort of like centralized, like top down kind of, we lack granular specific information as to the context specificity of, like, the local areas all over these places. So we're gonna take this one way that we figured out that this agriculture works, or this method of building works. We're going to copy it. We're going to do it all over the place, because when you lack information, I think you have to use a blunt tool. It's like, the pandemic just gave us a great example of this, which is like, we don't know where the virus is, so lock down the whole country. Right? Which is like, if you actually, and then there was like a lot of big backlash, which is like, well, if we had testing infrastructure, we would know where the virus is, and then you could have, local lockdowns, right? And that's 100% true. If there was granularity to the analytics about about what you had where and what the environmental conditions were where, then you could have, smaller and more precise kind of interventions in the environment to have the effects that you're looking for. If you lack that information, or if you usually through some combination of that information is very obscure or hard to get, or your system for having information is not up to the task, you have to use these blunt tools and like take these blunt measures. So I think you see this, like seeing like a state model, the monoculture agriculture, this kind of thing. You have these examples over and over and over again. Yep. of taking solutions that were true in some specific context, but they were very scalable. So scale them way up and do it all over. And you go to, you like the French roll into fucking Africa and are like, hey, you're going to grow a bunch of wheat now. And they're like, I don't know, man. Like, we've been growing all this other stuff for a long time. Like it's working.
Doesn't grow here that well.
And they're like, no. Yeah. Like you're gonna grow all this stuff now, and it's gonna be the same, and you're gonna do. And then like decades, and we don't have any topsoil anymore, right? Because like you like deplete, because you're doing like solutions that are blunt and like not actually information rich, and like context specific, that are used and that lead to like a system overall that is less complex than it could be, complexity as a sort of an umbrella term for less or less kind of I hate to use even the word efficiency, because it's not necessarily efficient. It's like robust and in a way that's making use of the specific resources and the kind of thing. So I think that's an important piece of this sort of commons, or like poly commons, like patchwork of independent local farms, whether it's the family farm, which interestingly, I think you could look at it as a family as a commons. You could also look at it as like a hereditary monarchy in a lot of part of the world. So
I argued on Twitter that the family could actually be considered a cult. Just
naturally, it could be any of these. It could be any of these things.
Cult, just one tiny little cult.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I would love to build. I would love to build on what you're saying and go a direction that's going to take me to something that I've been saying a lot recently that I think is important, and that is that regenerative systems require the richness of information, like that interaction that you're talking about, James. Like regenerative systems have to be responsive and organic in that way, right? Because everywhere is different. There's micro climates. It's a participatory activity, it's a mutualistic one. It's not a domination oriented activity. It has to be done on some levels through emergent complexity of human behavior and response. What's just as a sidebar, I think like what gets scaled and iterated is what people could make money on and control, not necessarily what was most useful, right? Because we're talking about some heuristics and templates, whether it be for, maybe there is a universal cultural building sort of like heuristic and specific process tools that you need everywhere to make basic goods that can interact when organized correctly. But that's being generous, like giving people, scaling those sort of universals empowers other people and gives you a lack of control. But scaling, so there's some interesting like lines being drawn in my head there. Sidebar. Happy to unpack later. But what I wanted to arrive at was you have to have richness of information. You have to have this like complexity unfolding to make regeneration. And when you have regenerative systems, when you have closed loop regenerative systems, it changes a bunch of things that we think about as being problems. Consumption, for example. Kind of a dirty word, like, oh no, we have too much of that, like people consuming stuff is bad, so we've done all this work to become less bad. But when you close loops in natural systems and you're operating kind of within Kate Raworth's economics, donut economics, which is basically saying, there's a minimum amount of stuff you need and there's a maximum that the environment can support, and if you're in that range, everything's fine. So if you're operating in that range and your systems are closed loop, consumption turns into participation. It can even be an acceleration of regeneration. So let's say you're on a farm where you're making biochar and then putting that in the soil. Participation in that through consumption of food and like just needing stuff from the land can actually put biochar into the soil faster, which can actually build your soil faster and can create more, it's an accelerant of regeneration. So I think that that's been a salient sort of shift in like how to look at things, because we're in the world now where consumption means you take stuff and you turn to a trash pile somewhere else.
but if it's circular, like you yourself are contributing to the regeneration, like
exactly.
the process of consuming is contributing to the process of like managing nutrients. I have a meta comment on another meta comment. What if we had industrial society? We did, and then we lost like all this knowledge about how to do traditional things, but then we use the internet and technology to regain those skills. I think that's like basically my meta comment is that's what's going on here, is that we're like a whole generation who have completely lost a lot of skills, and we're just like using the internet to regain them. And then like a sub comment to the conversation you've just been having is is a little bit of an anarchist perspective of like, you know, I don't know, for example, if I'm like trying to do something in our place and I'm looking stuff up, I just like Google a bunch of stuff and then use what works, you know, like methods for planting fruit trees, or I don't know, managing asparagus plantations. I'm only going to mention perennials because I'm a perennial maximalist. But yeah, so I'm wondering, like, you know, I just sort of think like, I don't know, there doesn't necessarily have to be like a top down or dominating force with this stuff. It can just be like tools that exist that people can use at will, which is like the idea of anarchy in general, is just sort of like, it's voluntary. All of it's voluntary, you know, so it's just sort of like, you know, pick and choose.
Yeah, sorry, go for it.
No, I mean, I keep turning my mind to this notion of like a minimum viable design specification. And relating to what you're just saying, Ashley, it seems like what you're saying is that the tool itself is the minimum viable design specification, or to translate that to what you're doing, Eli, you know, the distillery itself, or the, what is it, the operation box? What do you call it?
Oh, the automation box.
The automation box might be minimum viable design specification. And then you're like, okay, here's an affordance. Go use it for your private, you know, compound, if you want to call it a, you know, a monarchical or a commons. You know, all of these definitions get very blurry, because even commons, the first, you know, principle of the commons is boundaries. And so it's a kind of a private entity in some ways, just like a family. But it seems like, you know, I'm wondering if you see anything more as a minimum viable design specification in your case, besides the technology, the actual physical, you know, product, and then perhaps some kind of social tech that, you know, allows you to coordinate, say, within a community, you know, very kind of basic, that's maybe modular and you know, can be specified different ways. And then, well, anyway, I'll let you answer that. I have an extension question, but then it's just stretching the question too far. So go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know if it's really the tool or the technology. I mean, I'm kind of of the mind that we have plenty of solutions. Like we had enough technology a long time ago to live in a regenerative way, and to do just fine. Most ideas are pretty good, right? They are solutions to a problem and they often work, but they're just done so poorly. So I feel like the minimum viable tool is the heuristic. It feels like it's the intention, it's the why, right? Because that's really what determines the outcome in the end, is that patterning of behavior. And I think there are two basic ways of being in the world. I'll organize people into two ways of being. There's people living in purpose, who are engaged and nurturing and present and thriving. And there are people living in cycles of self-soothing. I've been on both sides of this plenty of times, right? And the cycles of self-soothing is what drives consumption and extraction. This like sort of like unaware, so lack of awareness in consumption and the why. And so it really is, maybe it's the completeness of the toolkit. You know, are you really addressing the full constellation of needs? Is your bowl full, or does it have holes? For me, that's more critical than like a particular, like, is it the box or is the whole distillery? Like it, I don't know, that's where my brain went with that.
That's such a beautiful answer. I have no other question or comment besides that's just such a beautiful, that's just like that's such a beautiful concept, that like technology, me paraphrasing, technology is a tool that is used well by healthy people. I don't know, it's just like people in healthy communities, you know what I mean? It's just like, I don't know, it just reminds me of I think it was Dennis Hopper made this comment about like using drugs. It's like drugs, any drug can open a door, but like too much of it can close the same door that it opens. It's like, it's just, you know, it's a tool like anything else. James, did you have anything you wanted to add?
On this question of, I guess the minimum viable design, Jason, you started this with, or I guess asked specifically the minimum viable design. I think
to allow, to allow maximum evolution and emergence and diversity of expression across landscape and culture and everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's the minimum viable. He talked about tech. He talked about tools, and I think that, like, towards Eli's answer, like there's an idea, this idea of purpose, and there's this idea of sort of how do we use technology, like how do we use tools, like no individual tool or like specific tool is going to get anyone anywhere that they're not sort of imagining is possible to get to, or have like collectively decided is a good place to go. So in terms of like,
you're going to bring in Ivan Illich, aren't you? I just know it. I know you want to. Go ahead.
I was gonna bring in Christopher Alexander first, which dovetails very nicely with Ivan Illich.
Okay.
But I think that there's I have been reading a lot of Illich recently, actually, and also Christopher Alexander, who's a great teacher of mine, or has been. That I've been doing a lot of research and studied with the Building Beauty program, like the school he started in Italy, and like I've been engaging with that world some. But where they both tap into and where they both pointing at, I think, is that like one of the original, I don't know, call it a decentralized coordinating technology, but it's effectively morality. It's a morality as a decentralized human coordination mechanism, and what the industrial age has brought with it is sort of a bunch of groups that were like locally moral that then started running into each other. This morality and these ideas about what is good and what is moral in the world very much acted as constraints on the sort of activities that they would do, the things that they would build, like just like what they thought was wrong was just generally not done. And I think what you see in modernity, that's the big boogeyman word, modernity. But what you see in modernity is and the industrialization process and the financialization and the kind of unleashing of capital. I think it's like the classic. Sort of cultures started mashing into each other. They started meeting each other. These different moral frameworks were like, wait a minute, we don't actually make sense in contact. So everything's breaking down, and then eventually you get to the point where like some German guy is like, God's dead, you killed him, and like everything's fucked. I don't know if this isn't the radio. I guess you can say that, but so. What I think what it takes to like really get to a place is, and this is where I was going to bring Christopher Alexander. Christopher Alexander points at as pretty much why we can't make beautiful stuff anymore. Is a deeply rooted kind of foundational, like conceptual relationship to the universe and the world and each other that is like scientific and reductive in a way that renders like nature as separate from us, as separate from man, and separate from people, and therefore the whole paradigm of like nature being this regenerative system that like I'm fucking up and now I need to go and do something specific to like regenerate. Like there's that whole sort of split and distance. Is part of a conception of the world that sort of renders the resources and the materials that we're using, and like all the kind of conversation we've been having here and all the language we've been using around economic language and kind of resource and extraction and value and all this stuff. There's a relationship to matter and like stuff and like dirt and like rocks and like materials and like trees and like all this stuff as like unintelligent, unthinking, like inert stuff. Even I'm made of that same stuff. I just happen to be a very complicated clump of those wiggles, and therefore I have this experience that emerges from this very complex clump of wiggles. And there's a question of, I have no idea how to get there. I don't know what to do to get there. Other people have attempted to answer the question, but it's like a reconceptualization and sort of it's not quite, but it is a sort of a remystification or a conceptualization of a relationship to the world and to the universe that Christopher Alexander lays out, that has space for the systematic, mechanical, powerful and constantly useful descriptive power of the sort of scientific industrial approach to engaging with the world, and a personal, emotional, and feeling relationship with kind of everything there is, with the materials that we're made of and also that the world is made of, and an inherent relationality to our environment that is, I think, maybe something of the difference between the kind of people who, like, say, are living with purpose and are kind of like driven to like they're not like effortfully mindful per se. They're in relationship to their environment, versus a sort of folks, especially in countries like ours that are like highly individualistic, highly atomized places that don't have that like kind of relationship with their environment that allows them to like care for their farm like they would their sister or their mother or their daughter.
Or they're just not able to, given the pressures of the broader society, right? It's a lot of I know that there's like tension talking about regenerative agriculture world where people push back and say it's not that farmers don't want to take care of their land. They love their land. They love ecology, but they just can't make a living. They can't have a livelihood because they're embedded in a larger system that is extractive, right? And so they have to compete. They have to get big, get big or get out.
Right.
Use the chemicals, things of that nature. Yeah.
Absolutely. Where Illich comes in and talks about that exact problem, where it's not just a matter of like, oh well, if you journaled enough and like realized that you were one with everything, like you would be a farmer too, and like you'd take care of it and be good. Like, no, it's like you're embedded in a culture and a system that drives itself and produces itself in certain ways through certain things. And there's in the capital environment, in the financialized environment, there is a whole world of there are things that are valuable in terms that you can value them in an economic sense. These things are generally quantifiable, and then there's a whole sort of like the cosmology that Christopher Alexander talks about, and this relationality thing. Like, this is not it's priceless in a true sense, in a sense that it's in the economic paradigm, it's in the shadows. It's like Illich's word, in the shadows, where he talks about how in the economic world there's all of this just like huge chunk of our human experience that is just like it's just unseen. It's just obscured by the legibility of the capital system and the necessary legibility that the sort of state capital industrial system requires to run the machine. The machine requires machine legibility. Right, the blockchain requires, and the AI thing, and like the comments on AI, and the sort of, is this a tweet about a shoe? It's like what that is like, the machine requires machine legibility. It requires discrete qualifiers. It requires this kind of thing that leaves out this question of sort of morality and purpose, and like the deeper like emotional experience of the human. That is like what Alexander's talking about. Like, he's coming at it, he's an architect. He's not he's not talking about it abstractly in a spiritual kind of way where, you know, we're all structurally one and like we're all, you know, part of this big, like, yeah, he brings those people in. He talks about Whitehead and Bohm and like the Buddhists and like all these kind of like oneness and wholeness vibes. But he's coming at it from like like I'm building buildings and I need to build nice buildings that people actually like living in and that generate life themselves. And he makes a lot of really beautiful points about it. It's not an abstract or even a like you know, kind of cognitive relationship or like a concept, an abstract concept of like you could think of yourself in relationship to the world in this way and it might make your behavior, you know, change. No, it's like actually like you are structurally continuous with the environment and, you know, in a real connected like biopsychosocial way are continuous with it. And but like you say, like when you're embedded in a system of when you're the farmer that's embedded in a system of capital that like needs to pay the bills and keep the lights on and like buy the food, like it's not a simple easy thing. And I think that's I think that causes a lot of like I don't know, it's something like our morality lags our means of living in alignment with our morality kind of thing, or precedes rather. Our morality like precedes our ability to live in alignment with it. Like there's this gap. So I think if especially if you've gone through like some sort of personal transformation process, like Eli mentioned before, and come to a place where like, oh wow, I do care about this stuff. I do see what we're talking about here. I do see why this is important stuff. And then it's like, wow, my life is like way shittier now because I just like, I can see all of this. I can see all of this disgusting, like damage, like state of the world, like so much clearer now that, you know, now I'm actually, you know, potentially like even less prepared or less motivated to attempt to try to help because like I have like this idea of like what's right that is in tension with like everything I'm seeing around me and in society.
If that tension gets too strong, then the utopian totalitarian tendencies can come out.
Well, I think
dominating to avoid domination.
It creates a crisis experience. I think that's spot on. I think it creates a crisis experience. I feel like I've talked to plenty of people in this mode where there's like personal transformation and sort of realization of the like terribleness of things, or like just like realization of the sort of like misalignment or like unhealth of maybe, you know, some parts of society that then creates this crisis situation when a person is in crisis and they're looking for reasons or solutions. They're highly susceptible to being offered reasons and solutions, bottom line. And I think that like, because these problems that we're facing in terms of these like global scale, like ecological problems, and that's why I think the like sort of like localist emergent complexity is such an important paradigm, because what it does takes these like, you know, climate change or something, like one of these problems that's this like impossibly huge, multifaceted, multidimensional. Nobody can wrap their head around it. Nobody can even like think clearly about what to necessarily do. And like takes it and it's like, no, like go find a piece and like take care of it. And then and we'll get a lot of other people to like go and find pieces and take care of it. And like, I think that these huge problems create these crisis situations for folks or for whole groups, which are then susceptible to, like the folks that are selling utopian visions, or the folks that are selling totalitarian visions with utopian flavors, or just like any kind of things. And I think that there's natural disasters historically have been a really, I think many examples of this kind of thing. There's this great book, Doom, by what's his name? He's like an economic historian. Doom. And it pretty much, it's like a theory of history. It's like him going through history and walking through natural disasters, like the natural disasters where it's like, you know, the same like historical events that were like you know, you might read them in another place as like, oh, well, there was this social movement and like these people, or like, you know, there was this political movement and there were these tensions and like social things going on. But then like, he's like, no, actually there was just a massive earthquake. So this religion was the most organized, and like everyone went to church because they were like, what the fuck's going on? Like, it's
Oh
like,
my God.
it's like, so there's like things like, there's examples of this where there's like crises that are totally out of our control that then I think create a lot of, you know, psychological exploitation capability or opportunity for folks. And the folks, the utopian folks aren't, I'm not even, you know, some of them are maybe malicious, but they're not necessarily, you know, that there's
I don't
a lot
know.
of
Jason and I have talked about this a little bit. I don't know if he agrees with me, but I've said to him several times that like, I just think crisis equals like cults, like, you know, I don't know, people want explanations for things, and then, you know, people who are like strong leader types will take advantage of the fact that people like want easy explanations, and then you know, we'll kind of glom around these groups. And I feel like the strongest capacity that people need at the moment is like a level head, and to just not buy into, you know, all encompassing explanations, such as Bitcoin solves this, but instead thinking like, you know, Bitcoin might solve one tiny part of it or whatever. I also have another meta comment, which is that it's wild that like all of these people like you guys who are it seems to me, you know, open to the fact that technology can help solve things, are also like why, I don't want to say hippie, but like in tune with the interconnection of all things and energy in the universe or something, whatever. You get what I'm saying. And it's so funny because Joe Norman, who's always, he's a fellow Doomer optimist, is always talking about Christopher Alexander, and he's like hard-nosed, you know, statistical analysis. What'd you say?
I thought he was an uncertain.
What'd you say, Jason? No.
He specifically differentiated himself as an uncertain pragmatist. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, as opposed. Yeah, exactly. No, that's like a perfect way to show that Joe Norman is like, he's like, I'm not taken up by cults. I believe in like statistical analyses of things, et cetera. But then he loves Christopher Alexander, so it's just this funny thing because like, I don't know. I guess I'm just standing our generation for having the ability to like hold these really wild worldviews and approaches to reality in mind at once. And I think it's just, I don't know, I just feel like really hopeful about the ability of you know, people who think this way, and you guys to like solve complex problems by like approaching them with this like multifaceted perspective. So yay, you guys are cool.
Why don't we move towards wrapping up? We've been going for over an hour and a half. Eli, do you want to talk some more about kind of, you know, so you're putting out this product now, like do you have like a 5-year, I know you're talking about like something with mushrooms. Are you thinking of joining one of these communities, that these eco-industrial villages in, you know, the network of villages that, you know, you're talking about? Well, network implies that it's going to arise. Do you want to talk a little bit more about, you know, where you're moving this, and you can of course integrate anything else we've said as well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I made a multi-year plan, and there's a bunch of stuff happening in the meantime. I do end up in an eco village, and I really like the idea of not just necessarily being embedded in one, but the network, like kind of floating through the network and doing what I love, which is helping people figure out how to make stuff. I love making things. So, and even more, I love helping other people make stuff. So I've kind of always been an orbiting human. I've never really embedded myself in much of anything. I can orbit for a long time around something and be like, okay, this is definitely where I want to be, and then but I like doing figure eights across the different galaxy constellations of things. And so right now, yeah, I'm in a really meta position right now. I'm trying to look at it metasystemically as big as I can. And what I'm seeing is there's a movement already. I mean, eco-villages exist. There's these networks of them that already exist, and they have common problems around having a real economic solution that is also inclusive. Right, this is a really gnarly problem for a lot of these projects, and I'm coming forth with what I think is a part of the solution. I'm really interested in implementing that as far and wide as I can, because I think that these people are really building little pockets of the future that I would like to live in, that I can be proud to hand down. And it feels inevitable anyway, but better sooner than later, for sure. So, you know, I think the reason it's challenging is there are very few people who sit at the intersection of getting it in the way you've kind of described, Ashley, and also the competency and access to world building and like tool building, like going to the end of product development and bringing that through supply chain. This is like very small Venn diagram of folks who can operate that way, who can carry that intention into manifestation and meta manifestation for tools. So I feel compelled to do that, to just sit there at that really uncomfortable, lonely intersection of those two things and grow it as much as I can. And, you know, I sent up I opened a room on Clubhouse almost over a month ago now called Eco-Industrial Village Networks. And it's been intense. You know, it's kind of like pinch me. The people who are showing up are amazing. They're almost doing an about face whenever they realize what's going on and what I'm seeing and what I'm kind of instigating, and the desire for participation is intense. So I'm gonna keep doing that too. We're gonna keep the beacon bright, and because it isn't one solution. It's not a silver bullet. It is a coordination of mutually aware, self-aware solutions that integrate together. And that's the big shift I think that we're going to be seeing from business, especially. It's like, don't just be a competitive, you know, one-trick pony. No, it's about coordination and collaboration with the intention of enriching people and our soils fundamentally. Kind of overcoming the cognitive dissonance we have that soil biology is this like income that we're entitled to spend. No, it's capital. You know, you can take some, but you got to give back more than you took. And that's true for humans as well. You know, we can be useful to each other, but we need to be nourishing and grow the human capital as well. And I really do believe that if you said about a human restoring soil, you're going to restore that human in the process, just inherently by creating that relationship and engaging in that activity with that intention. And so putting an economic engine into that as a way of being while eroding extractive industry, that's 100% where I'm going. And wherever that takes me, I'm sure I'll visit some eco-villages, probably live at some, but I hope to help all that are interested in orienting that way to be successful.
Can you list any specific engines, any specific machines that you have in mind right now, or is it too early?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, there's the distillery, which is great. That was kind of born out of the pandemic. Described earlier, there's a mushroom grower I'm working on, and a starch. What's that?
So a tree log is what you're saying.
It's for medicinals, reishi and things like that. But no, tree logs are definitely the way to go. What it does actually is when you run the distillery, if you go through the starch conversion process, you often have a bunch of solids left over, and so you can get those leftovers, put it in the mushroom grower, and build a resource cascade with like virtually zero labor. Right, that's kind of the point, is to have it at appropriate scale.
Right.
Financeable.
All of these machines connecting up in these circular resource flows. Is that kind of how you're thinking about, you know, what you work on next? Is it has to connect to the previous one?
Yeah, no, yeah, I've identified some flows and I've identified what I can buy and what I have to develop. And I've created my pipeline based on what's a pioneer species in this out there in the capitalist wild. Like the distillery is great because it's small and it generates a ton of revenue. You don't need it to be a part of a closed loop system for it to succeed. But there are elements, design elements in this closed loop systems that really do need the context. So I, developed this later, and that is a important part of what makes this work is the efficiencies from having that complexity. So yeah, the ordering is what works now and building from there.
Nice. James, are you also seeking to embed yourself in one of these eco-industrial villages, or what are your plans moving forward? Do you have them? To the extent that you do, I'm not trying to like
right.
your option out there.
Oh, Jason. No. I've spent some amount of time at different places that you might call eco-industrial villages. There may be pre-industrial eco villages than they are eco-industrial villages, but I could certainly see myself back in that kind of situation. My plans right now I'm not unlike our friend Eli here, quite mobile. I'm many months into an RV trip circumnavigating the contiguous United States, and heading back. I started at the end of June from Northern California, where and we'll be back there in several weeks to pretty much link back up with Eli here and be in person again. So the foreseeable time is there, and working on some of the kind of strategy and sort of world building around what this speculative near future of eco-industrial village networks might look like. And beyond that, I have no set plans.
That's good. Well, any last words from anyone? Ashley?
I guess I should just tell you guys that it's typical on our podcast to just cut the guests off or cut somebody off in the middle of a sentence. So if you have any kind of cliffhanger sentence you can think of that you want to say at the end, you can one of you can say it now, and we'll cut it off in the middle, and then the audience won't know what the end is.
It's a funny invitation. I like that.
It's
Yeah.
like, if you want to know the answer to the question is that kind of thing.
But yeah, what a lot of people don't realize in the permaculture industry, that would connect a lot of dots, I think, for the localist mutualist movement, the kind of small scale farming movement, and the sort of decentralized tech cryptocurrency people, is that Satoshi is actually